Welcome to the Chalkboard, my fellow football nerds, for episode number 3 of Chalk Talk, brought to you by the Painted Lines. I'm your host, Shane Haff, and you can follow me on Twitter at @halfandhalf_TPL. I'm joined tonight again by the best co-host that was willing to join me for what we were willing to pay, which was nothing. You've seen him on the Tough Cover Pod. It's Mark Henry Jr. You can follow him on Twitter at @MarkHenryJr_. Mark, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing well. Always happy to talk football. We're finally we're like a month away almost at this point, I think. Yeah, I think we're exactly a month away from real football. Obviously, we're a night away from preseason football, which we'll talk about, but I'm excited to get into some Eagles and some NFL talk.
Absolutely. And we've got a great show lined up for you guys tonight. We're going to talk Mount Rushmore of Eagles draft picks and draft busts. Look around the division at draft success over the last decade, and we're going to preview a little bit of preseason week 1 action. And so before we get into that, though, this podcast is live on Apple Podcasts. So if you would do us a favor, if you would give us a 5-star rating and a review, if you'd follow the show, share it with a friend, we would really appreciate it. So while we're live here, drop a comment wherever you're watching, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and we'll feature that on the show. We've got Dibes chiming in already. It says Mount Rushmore of Eagles pick. That's a pretty small mountain. Well, see, the thing about Mount Rushmore is there's only 4 spots. So regardless, we've got to narrow it down to 4. And so, Mark, why don't you kick us off? We're looking at the Mount Rushmore of Eagles draft picks. And so it has to be this last decade, 2011 through 2020. So no 2021 picks are allowed, nothing before 2011. Why don't you start us off with your first guy on your Mount Rushmore of draft picks?
So I think I did this a bit wrong. I only did first-round picks here, so I had a super limited pool, so I didn't go throughout the whole draft. So our Mount Rushmores on both sides are going to look a little different. But for the positive side of the Mount Rushmore, I think Fletcher Cox has to be the first name. You get him at the 12th pick, and he's obviously over-delivered on that. He's obviously still an integral part of this team 10 years later. So that's been the best pick, I think, of the last decade.
Yeah, absolutely. Fletcher Cox is on mine as well. First-round pick in 2012. Anytime you see a guy spend a decade with a team, that's great. And hopefully Fletcher's not slowing down anytime soon. So Fletcher Cox makes my Mount Rushmore of picks, so we agree on our first selection. So who's another guy you've got on your list?
I'm going with the next year. They were in a rhythm there 2 years in a row. But Lane Johnson with the 4th pick. Obviously, it's not a value or anything. You're taking him with the 4th pick, but he's delivered on and some on that, I think, and he's still underrated as in terms of tackles across the league and players across the league. I saw some top 100 lists this year, and I don't think he was on either of them, the big ones that were out there. So I think that's a little bit disrespectful. I think his PFF grades have still been really good. Obviously, regardless of how he's been the last couple of years, he was the left tackle or the right tackle, I should say. No, wait. I'm getting all messed up because Jason Peters, but he was one of the tackles on the Super Bowl team. I'm forgetting which because Jason Peters is out.
He stayed at right. And,
he stayed at right. Yeah.
Vitae went to left tackle.
Yeah, of course. Well, I can't believe I just had that brain fart there. But yeah, I would say Lane Johnson. Obviously, even with you can't lay off the juice as one guy named Jason Kelsey once said. And he's had some injury issues, but he's been so good when he's been in there.
Yeah, absolutely. Lane Johnson's also on my list. He's the only first-round pick I had left, though, so I know we'll have different guys for our last 2 spots. I'm an big Oklahoma football fan my whole life, and I watched Lane Johnson play all through college, and I knew he was good, but when he went 4th overall in 2013, I realized I didn't really know how to evaluate offensive line. So it's a big blind spot that I've worked on ever since then. But yeah, he's a great pick, great player, definitely underrated, but hopefully he can stay healthy this year and put his name back on the radar. So who do you have in your 3rd spot there, Mark?
This one's obviously a bit controversial, but I think Carson Wentz has to be brought up because he was the quarterback for 14 weeks of a Super Bowl team, and he looked like the franchise quarterback. He obviously got to that second contract. Now, what happened after that second contract, I won't get into, but I think you have to put him on there just because, in terms of first-round picks at least, in terms of how he looked for that first couple of years and how he looked like he was going to be the guy, and at least was the guy for one magical season until he went down and put us in such a good position that Nick Foles was able to finish the job.
Yeah, it's interesting. I thought long and hard about Carson Wentz with this, and I think you could make an argument to put him on either list. I mean, he had the MVP season. He played great in 2019. He's not here anymore, and he cost the franchise dearly to get rid of him. So, I mean, I think you could make an argument to put him on the bust or the Mount Rushmore, but ultimately he didn't make either one of my lists. But I do have a quarterback on the Mount Rushmore, and it is Nick Foles, the third-round pick in 2012. And this is not a Nick Foles is better than Carson Wentz take. This is not a they should have kept Nick Foles take. I was on the record after the Super Bowl run saying they should have traded Nick Foles while his value was highest. But when you're the quarterback of the team that wins the Super Bowl, you're the Super Bowl MVP for the only Super Bowl that an organization has ever had. And I know he wasn't great early in that run. It was a miracle we beat Atlanta, but the way that he played against Minnesota and against the Patriots for an organization with only one Super Bowl, Nick Foles has to make that list for me.
So I'm going to cheat here. I didn't have a fourth first-round pick. I was going to try to make some weird Nelson Aguilar argument, but I'm going to go all the way back to 2011 and break the first-rounder trend here for me and go with Jason Kelce, since you got him in the sixth round in 2011. I honestly thought that it was before this decade. I would have guessed that he would have been 2010, but I'm glad to sneak him in there. Obviously, Jason Kelce has been a top-tier center in this league for a long time and obviously made himself a legend in 2017 at the parade, and is going to be and probably the most recognizable guy from that Super Bowl team almost because of that whole legend that he's created. You saw what he was doing all summer all over Philadelphia and the Jersey Shore. He seems like he's really embraced the city, and he's a beloved Eagle of all time.
Absolutely. Dibes chiming in asking about Trent Cole, but Trent Cole was outside of our time limits. It had to be in the last decade. And I think Cole was like 2004, 2005, something like that. So he was prior to 2011, so he wasn't available on our lists here. And Jason Kelce, yeah, he's my other guy. Sixth round pick. When you get a sixth round pick who becomes the best player at his position in the entire league for the amount of time he's been there, I just don't think you can beat that. And so that rounds it out for me. So our lists are actually the same, except we have a different quarterback on the Mount Rushmore. I thought about honorable mention to Jalen Mills, a guy that I dogged the whole time he was at Philadelphia. But when you take a guy in the seventh round and he's a starter at a premium position for 5 years, that's worth a lot. But ultimately, this wasn't like the best values. It was the Mount Rushmore, and he's not a face of the Eagles forever. So I left him off of that list.
That's fair. That's fair for sure.
So not to leave out the rest of the NFC East, not necessarily a Mount Rushmore, but we're going to go through each division team, and we're going to name either their best pick or best two picks out of the last decade. So which team do you want to start with, Mark?
I mean, I think Washington and New York, I can kind of just do bang, bang off the bat because they go together in the same year. I wasn't right about both of these at the time. I thought Dwayne Haskins was going to be better than he is. So that was a big time swing and a miss by me, and it was a big time swing and a miss by Washington. And I think that they didn't – I forget where they took him, but obviously he's on Pittsburgh as a backup like 3 years into the league. They are still an absolute mess at quarterback at Washington. I know you think they should have went and got Justin Fields, and I don't disagree at all. But – there's still a mess at quarterback. They haven't recovered from the Dwayne Haskins pick. And the Giants are still trying to convince themselves that the Daniel Jones pick in that same draft was the right pick. And I just don't think it was still. I haven't seen anything that's told me that Daniel Jones is the franchise quarterback that only Dave Gettleman really seems to think that he is. So I'd say that those two picks set both of those franchise back a couple of years.
Okay, what about the best picks by each of those teams? Do you got thoughts on those?
You go first or on best or worst, and I'll think it over for a second.
Okay, well we'll stick with worst. We'll get the worst out of the way for the division mates, and then we'll jump back to the best since you started.
That's a fun way to do it.
Yeah, so I mean, with Washington, it was Haskins at pick 15 in the 2019 draft. That's obviously a bad pick. since he's no longer there. Another big one is Darius Geis. They took him in 2018 in the second round. And I mean, I know a lot of Eagles fans were hard after Geis that year, and he fell out of the first round. I know there was reports that came out that he had some blowups with staff at the combine and a lot of character concerns, and he ultimately falls out of the first. Washington takes him in the second, and he was injured and never played his rookie year. And then in 2015, he comes out and he's injured in the opener. And he came back later and he played in 4 games before another injury. And then that offseason, he was cut for domestic violence charges, and he's never been signed again. So he was an early second-round pick that only appeared in 5 games and sustained 3 injuries before getting cut. So that's a pretty big one. And yeah, for the Giants, I agree. Daniel Jones, pick 6, 2019. He's not the guy. He's a bad pick. You mentioned that Washington should have taken Justin Fields. I would argue there's 3 of the 4 teams in the NFC East that should have taken Justin Fields, and the Giants are certainly one of them. But to me, the bigger misstep for the Giants was taking Saquon Barkley, number 2, in 2018. I mean, this guy has missed more games than he's played in over the last 2 years. But that's just how running backs go. Like, running backs aren't durable and they don't last, and you can't spend the second pick overall on a running back. But as much as we make fun of the Eagles and their drafting, let me read you the name of the first player that the Giants took in the 2015 through 2020 draft. Okay. We've got Eric Flowers, bust. Eli Apple, bust. Evan Ingram, bust. Saquon Barkley, bad pick. Daniel Jones, maybe they'll admit he's a bust after this year. Andrew Thomas, terrible rookie season. And every one of those guys except Ingram was a top 10 pick. So it takes a lot of talent to whiff consistently on top 10 picks like the Giants have.
No, yeah, they've been terrible. The Giants have, and the Washington and New York have not drafted well. And then you get to the other team in the division, Dallas, and it's much harder to pick what the best pick is than the worst pick. There's so many more options. I was kind of shocked when I went to look at Dallas's first round pick history at kind of the last couple of years at how good of a job Jerry Jones has done. I'm tempted to try to do a hot take where CeeDee Lamb is their best pick because I think he's going to turn into a superstar, and I think he fell into their laps. But you probably have to look at the work that they've done on the offensive line. Just all three picks: Tyron Smith at 9 in 2011, Travis Frederick at 31 in 2013, which, by the way, was a pick that people were scratching their heads at. Like, people thought he was like a 3rd rounder, late 2nd rounder at best. Maybe they took him at 31. Obviously not a long career due to extenuating circumstances, but he was a rock solid center. And then Zach Martin, Notre Dame, probably the best Notre Dame player of my lifetime as a Notre Dame fan, in 2014 at pick 16. And he's been maybe the best offensive lineman in football until maybe Quentin Nelson came around, another Notre Dame player. But I would say any of those 3 makes sense to be the best pick. And then the worst pick for me, I think you're going to go a different direction. So I tried to go a different direction here. And by the way, I don't support taking running backs either. I think the Saquon pick was bad. And I think the Zeke pick is bad too. But just because of how, they have been productive when they've played both guys, it's hard for me to put the bust tag on them quite yet. I think Zeke is I think Zeke gets a bit underrated, but Saquon, I think he's a bad pick. I think he hasn't been healthy at all, but you can't say he's worse than Daniel Jones quite yet for me, just because I still think that he could be the best running back in football this year. But for Dallas, I'm going to go with Morris Claiborne. With the 6th pick in 2012, he was a guy that I thought was going to step in right away. And, LSU was DBU back then. It still is to a certain extent. I really thought Morris Claiborne was just going to fall right in line with those LSU and SEC D-backs that were coming in the top 10 and stepping right in and being studs. And he did not, to say the least. He did not get to the second contract on Dallas. So that is definitely a failure of a pick.
I got a chick on Facebook saying, can't say Barkley's a bad pick yet. Should they have selected somebody else? Sure, but 2,000 yards, I don't know.
Let me just say real quick, that's my buddy who is a Penn State graduate.
Okay.
So I think that is and I love Joe Chick, but I think that's a little Saquon Penn State fanism. He's extremely popular player among like our area, like because of the Penn State pull.
Sure. And to be clear, I think Barkley's a great player. If he stays healthy, he's a top 2 to 3 running back in the league. But I just say, if you take a running back number 2 overall, it doesn't matter if he's Barry Sanders. It is gross negligence in today's NFL. So that's a statement on the draft value at number 2 overall, not on the player. I think Barkley's a fantastic player. It's just not what you should do with the 2nd overall pick. And Agreed. For the same reason, Zeke Elliott going number 4 overall, 2016. I think that's Dallas's worst pick of the decade. And I did write down Claiborne too, 6th overall. He's out of the league now, and he only had 7 career interceptions. It's just not what you expected from them. So that's kind of the worst. You mentioned the 3 offensive linemen for Dallas for the best. And that's an incredible run of first-round draft picks, Smith, Frederick, and Martin in 3 out of 4 years. But to me, the best pick that Dallas has made in the decade has to be taking Dak Prescott in the 4th round.
That's a good one.
If you can get a franchise quarterback and you don't have to trade up for him, that's great. If you can get a franchise quarterback on day 3, that's phenomenal value. And there's just not better value than that in the division as a whole, maybe in the league, once you look past Tom Brady, than what they were able to do. So,
no, yeah.
Did you mention who your top picks were for the Giants in Washington? We might have skipped over those.
Let me pull it up. But just real quick on the Dallas point, the Dak Prescott is absolutely the best pick that might be the best pick made in the division in this decade. Obviously, I think he's an absolute franchise quarterback, no doubt about it. So making that in the 4th round, that's an absolute steal. I wasn't looking at. I was only looking at 1st-round picks when I was doing this earlier. Like I said, for the Eagles, so Dak didn't come up in my brain. But yeah, that's a no-brainer. The New York Giants, it's like you said, it's way harder to find a good pick than a bad pick. But you got to go Odell. I know that he was traded. It ended up causing a bunch of stuff. But Odell, for a little bit there, was in the conversation as a top 3 receiver. Obviously, they did trade him for multiple picks and at least 1 first-rounder, I think. So that ended up working out. And yeah, I'll stick with Daniel Jones as the worst, but Odell is probably the best pick, and it's not like some amazing pick. They picked him at 12 at the time. It felt like it was a bit of a reach, I remember, because of how many receivers were in that class. But obviously it worked out, and then obviously it didn't work out towards the end of the Odell run, and he's kind of declined and had trouble staying healthy in Cleveland too. So, but he was he's still, like, in terms of being a face of the league, he still seems like he is that, even while being maybe like a top 30 wide receiver, a top 35 wide receiver. But I'd have to go Odell, more so due to the lack of better choices elsewhere.
Real quick, Aaron on Facebook asked, are you guys on YouTube? And we are. You can subscribe to our channel. The Painted Lines is the channel name. It's also the website. We're on Twitter. And the podcast also goes out to Apple Podcasts the day after. So you can find us any of those places.
And then for the Washington football team, this is cheating again a little bit here because it just happened in 2020. But I think Chase Young is a Hall of Fame level player. That might sound early to say that, but I said that when he was a draft prospect, so I don't feel any worse about it after the year he had last year. I think he's a gold jacket level D end. I think he's going to be an absolute monster in this league for the next 10 years. I know you probably don't love the value on that because it's 2nd pick, and they still do obviously have a huge hole at quarterback, but I think that Washington will be able to figure that out in the next couple of years. And when you figure that out, you're still, maybe let's say you don't figure that out for 3 years, you'll still have Chase Young on a rookie deal in his 4th year at age like 24, 25. So I think he's just an unbelievable player. They probably had way better values, guys like Sweat, other guys come to mind like that, guys like Allen. But I think what Chase Young gives them is the type of player that does not come around very often. And I think the DNs like Chase Young don't grow off of trees. I know it seems like they do because the Bosas came from Ohio State as well. So whatever tree they have, that's getting them DNs is pretty crazy. But I think that when you can get a guy that has the potential to be the best player on the field, no matter what game it is, I think you have to take it, even if it's the 2nd pick. I think it's a great value.
Yeah, absolutely. We got your boy Chick chiming in again on Twitter. Could make a case for the whole D line of Washington, first round talent all over. I mean, yeah, that Washington has an absolutely loaded defense, and if they just they just need the quarterback, and they'd be a legitimate Super Bowl contender. And then Aaron saying, "Cool, I'm the Birdman _951 on YouTube. Nice to meet you guys. Nice to meet you too. We'll check your channel out, and maybe we can collaborate on something down the road. That'd be great." For me, I put down I tried to think outside the box a little bit, go with a little bit of value picks for the division mate. So I put Darius Slayton for the Giants coming off the board in the 5th round in 2019. For Washington, I put down Terry McLaurin in the 3rd round of 2019. And I also wrote down Chase Rouillet, who was a 6th round pick in 2017. And he's quietly had a really good career before he really burst onto the scene in 2020. I know PFF gave him the 3rd highest pass blocking grade among all centers last year. And so, we talked about Jason Kelce out of the 6th round. I don't think Rouillet is on that level yet, but another 6th round pick that's making a big impact at center for Washington.
Just another honorable mention for Washington. Antonio Gibson in the 3rd round last year. He looks like he's going to be a real player going forward, and he's a guy that my buddy Dan Johnson was all over coming out of Memphis. So I didn't know much about Antonio Gibson coming out. They took him in the 3rd round. It seemed like people thought that was a little bit of a reach, and he has overperformed that obviously so far.
Yeah, I'll admit I thought Gibson was a reach where they took him, and I really liked what I saw from him as a rookie. I almost entirely stayed away from 2020 though. Yeah, with the exception of one Eagles player that we might talk about. But when we get to the Mount Rushmore of Eagles bus, but I almost entirely stayed away from 2020 just because, it's just 1 year. I wanted to see a little more. So while technically could be included, I didn't really include any of those in mine. So let's get to it. What you guys have been waiting for, the Mount Rushmore of Eagles draft busts of the last decade. And I'm not going to lie, there's a lot more of these than the big hits. But let's roll through it. So, Mark, who's the first guy on your Mount Rushmore of Eagles busts?
I'm going to do 2 at once again, just to kind of – because I think they go hand in hand for me because both were so incredibly dumb at the time. Like, it's not like we're looking back 2020 hindsight, like whatever. The fact that they took a 26-year-old firefighter, I'll never forget it. I'll never forget where I was. I was on the phone with my buddy where I forget who we were even hoping for, but we were just, we had like a list of guys that we wanted. And then they come up and they announced Danny Watkins. Oh my God. I couldn't believe that. That was the 21st pick in 2011. And then a couple of years later, I remember I was in college. Or no, I was my senior year of high school, 2014, when they took Marcus Smith at 26th. And I had a couple years there at the end of high school and beginning of college where I wasn't diving as deep into the draft as I was before and have since. But I remember not knowing who Marcus Smith was when they took him at 26. And that is rare for me in the first round with even back then. I couldn't believe that they went with Marcus Smith. I couldn't believe they went with Danny Watkins. And then both ended up being insanely bad picks. So I think those go hand in hand because I couldn't believe them at the time and I still can't believe them now.
Yeah, those guys are both on my list. They're on anybody's list. That was before I was big into the draft process. So I didn't have evaluations on these guys, but I mean, Marcus Smith never started a game in Philadelphia and he had 4 sacks in his career while he was here. That's terrible for a first round pick. And then, I mean, Danny Watkins, that speaks for itself. So I'm going to throw it to another first-round bust, and that is Andre Dillard. Yeah. Andre Dillard. In 2019, the Eagles trade up in the first round for Andre Dillard, a guy they called a top 5 player on their board. I put out on Twitter talking about this that, first-round picks bust for a lot of reasons. It can be an injury. It can be they're just not a good scheme fit. There can be turmoil with coaching changes all the time. They don't ever get a chance, but it's very rare that you get a guy that just absolutely he just does not belong in the NFL. And it's concerning to me that the Eagles' entire scouting department missed it. And they didn't just take him, they traded up to get him. Now, the trade wasn't big. It was a 4th and a 6th round pick, but when you look at the guys that were available where they were going to pick, and this isn't like a hindsight oh man, this guy that went, 15 picks later turned out to be a stud. Literally the pick after where they were slotted in the first round is when Washington took Montez Sweat. The pick after the fourth rounder that they traded away is where the Cowboys took Tony Pollard. You think the Eagles would rather have Montez Sweat rushing off the edge and Tony Pollard in the backfield than Andre Dillard backing up Jordan Mailata right now? Just unforgivable panic move with a guy that there is no possible way they actually did their homework on. Just a terrible pick. Worst pick of my lifetime with the Eagles.
Wow. So you're saying Dillard's worse than Watkins?
Absolutely.
Wow.
Although maybe that's a strong statement. I should say, let me say, that's the worst pick of like my, when I was analyzing draft stuff, of my analysis lifetime. So when Watkins was drafted, I was like, I was following football, but I was bigger into college. I was an Eagles fan, but I didn't follow it the way that I do. But out of, say, the last 6 years when I've been doing draft stuff, Dillard by far the worst pick the Eagles have ever made.
Yeah, I was not huge on Dillard. Like, I think I had him ranked in the late 20s. You said earlier that ranking O-lineman way back then was a blind spot for you. And for me, I'm still willing to admit that it's definitely the thing I'm least confident in my draft evaluations. So Dillard, we took him, and I was like, all right, the Texans really wanted him. So we obviously traded up in front of the Texans. I thought that was a good sign. It has not been. He's also on my list, obviously. And I think it goes hand in hand with my next guy, and that's Jalen Reagor. At 2020, I know Dives is not happy with me for putting him on here. But I had him as my number 11 wide receiver in last year's class. And we took him as the fourth receiver off the board. I did not see anything last year that's changed my opinion on Jalen Reagor, as I've said time and time again. And then I know that it wasn't a great situation. Like, I know that it was not the perfect situation for Jalen Reagor, and I know that you can explain a lot of the things away due to injury, due to quarterback play, whatever it may be. Jalen Reagor was not productive, and I think you can look at other rookies last year, the guys that I had ranked above him. Obviously, I'm not going to get into, the obvious ones, Ruggs, Judy, Lamb, but even beyond that, I had Denzel Mims. He was hurt, so I'm going to take him out. Laviska Shenault, in a terrible situation in Jacksonville, was incredibly productive. Justin Jefferson, I don't think I need to tell people how good Justin Jefferson was for Minnesota. They were laughing at us. And then Brandon Ayuk was fantastic last year with Mullins and Beathard at quarterback. T. Higgins was great with a third of a season of Joe Burrow, and then the rest of Brandon Allen and bum backup quarterbacks in Cincinnati. So we saw multiple rookie receivers that went after Jalen Reagor that were also in negative situations and not in good situations that were conducive to them to succeed right away. And they all showed more than what Jalen Reagor showed last year. So I think we're going down a dark path with Jalen Reagor. I've said that before. I can't imagine he gets a second contract from the Eagles with what I've seen so far. So I hope I'm wrong, as I've said many times, but I really think Reagor is trending towards being a massive bust.
Yeah, I'm not ready to call Reagor a bust yet. Obviously, a bad first season. I'm ready to call it a bad pick. I called it a bad pick at the time. I think I had him as wide receiver 9 or 10. I can't remember. It was in that 9 or 10 range. But I did not have much of a difference between like 6 through 12. So I know I had Jefferson as the 4, and I think I had Mims as the 5. And after that, it was kind of a log jam. And so I didn't like the pick. But I'm going to go with a different receiver, and I'm going to go with J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, second-round pick in 2019, if not just for the guys that he was taken over. I mean, we talked about Terry McLaurin in the 3rd round, Darius Slayton in the 5th round. DK Metcalf is the guy that always gets talked about. And, I won't fault the Eagles for not taking Metcalf. I know a lot of teams removed him from their board because of some health red flags. And so, I mean, evaluation aside, if you have a medical red flag on a guy and you're not comfortable with it, you shouldn't take him, especially if you're the Philadelphia Eagles. But there were other guys. Now, that said, I was actually high on J-Jaw. I graded J-Jaw out very well, and I was excited when they took him. I learned from that with my scouting. I mean, to me, like, I watched J-Jaw, and I just saw this incredible contested catch receiver. And what I realized now, how I evaluate receivers a little differently, is it's great if you can make contested catches, but that's all J-Jaw did. And so if you're playing in the Pac-10, Pac-12, whatever it's called now, and every catch you make is contested, that's a problem. because you can't get separation. And if you can't get separation against Pac-12 defensive backs, you've got no business in the NFL. And so I learned from that a little bit. And so I always try to circle back and look at my draft rankings and see who I hit on and who I was wrong on and try to learn from that. So J-Jaw taught me a very valuable lesson that I still use when I scout yearly.
Yeah, I didn't love J-Jaw, but I certainly didn't hate it. And I definitely think that I was actually more negative on the Miles Sanders pick at the time than the J-Jaw pick. I wasn't a fan of either, but obviously that has not panned out the right way. J-Jaw has been a terrible pick, while Miles, you could argue, has been one of our better picks in a while, even if it is a running back in the second round. But yeah, J-Jaw is absolutely great. Like I said, I was doing first round picks, but J-Jaw is a worse pick than Jalen Reagor because at least there's some hope with Jalen Reagor. I don't think there's a soul in the city of Philadelphia who has any hope that J-Jaw is going to turn into anything at any point of his career.
I don't think J-Jaw thinks he's going to turn into anything, let's be honest. Okay, let's pivot away from draft talk. You guys probably heard us talk draft all leading up to the draft, and you're ready to talk actual football. So we'll put the draft aside, but we'll be coming back to it throughout the year because that's kind of our bread and butter. So let's talk about preseason. The Eagles kick off the preseason tomorrow night at 7:30 against Pittsburgh Steelers. So we here at the Painted Lines, we here at Chalk Talk, we want to give a public service announcement about the preseason, and that is this. It doesn't matter. In 2015, Chip Kelly was the coach for the Philadelphia Eagles, traded for his guy Sam Bradford, and I will never forget Week 3 against Green Bay, seeing that offense explode. We were up 25-0 in the first quarter. Bradford was 10 of 10 for 121 yards and 3 touchdowns and like a 160 passer rating. Like, unbelievable. I was convinced we were going to the Super Bowl. I'm glad I wasn't sports gambling at that point because I would have put it on the Eagles to win the Super Bowl. And we all know what happened. The Eagles were terrible. And so preseason does not matter. But that said, what do you expect from tomorrow night's preseason game?
Before we get into tomorrow night's preseason game, I have to touch on the Sam Bradford thing. Sam Bradford is my least favorite Philadelphia athlete of all time. I know you're an Oklahoma guy, but I remember watching Sam Bradford at Oklahoma and being like, I don't get it. Being like, I don't see it with this guy. Like, I don't think he's the prodigy and I was a kid back then, but I just remember being like, this guy's got like amazing talent around him and is just kind of throwing it 10 yards. And he was the exact type of quarterback that I don't like, that doesn't take chances downfield, that can't move around in the pocket. He's just precision from 5 to 20 yards, and that's all Sam Bradford does. So and I believed in Nick Foles. So when they traded Foles for Sam Bradford, I was heartbroken. I was a Chip Kelly guy too at the time, so it was hard to rationalize in my head. I still can't even understand the decision. And then when that game 3 happened against Green Bay, I sat down and I'm like, am I an idiot? Like, is Sam Bradford just like an incredible quarterback and I've been wrong for a decade? Like, and it's so funny with Sam Bradford because he got so many chances. Whatever, it's not about Sam Bradford. But all right, getting to today's preseason game, tomorrow's preseason game, I completely agree. The preseason means nothing. And this is my takeaway with training camp and the preseason in terms of as a fan or as, trying to evaluate things that happened, or it's confirmation. Everything's based on confirmation bias. If you see a player that you like that looks good, it's going to be like, oh yeah, there you go. You see, and he's getting into the offense and he's looking like he's ingratiated and he's looking like the guy I expect him to look like. Or if the player that you like plays poorly, it's just the preseason. It doesn't really mean anything. So that's what people do with the preseason. It's what people do with training camp. So I think that, it's hard to really glean anything from these preseason games, especially once Hurts goes out. I don't even know what the plan is necessarily. I haven't heard who's playing, who hasn't. I don't know if they've announced any of that or if they're keeping it close to the vest, really. But once Jalen Hurts isn't in the game, it's going to be hard to take away anything from this offense with Joe Flacco under center and then whoever else they're going to have under center. And then the defense, I don't think it's going to be easy to tell. Pittsburgh's not going to play a lot of guys. They already played in the Hall of Fame game. I can't imagine that they're going to give a ton of looks offensively that are going to test the defense very much. I'm very pessimistic about the preseason, if you can't tell. I don't get too jazzed up for it. I watch the first half usually, and then I'm like, all right. I'll have it on in the background a little bit for the second half. But the preseason, it's meaningless to me. I think they shortened it from 4 games to 3 games. That still feels like a money grab to me. Like I think this could be like a 2-game preseason next year.
Yeah, I mean, we know Hurts is starting, so it's always going to be exciting to kind of watch Hurts, but you're not going to see Hurts running the ball much.
No.
You're going to see him slide, get out of bounds. You're not going to see design QB runs, which I think will be a big part of the offense. Devonta Smith's not playing. I mean, there'd be some excitement if he was going to play, but he's out. I want to see rookies and the second-year guys. I mean, I want to see the young guys. You can read into some things for them. Beyond that, I mean, you're not going to see scheme. We're not going to get any insights into how the actual season's going to go or what the scheme's going to look like from Sirianni or from Jonathan Gannon. I mean, overall, I'm just glad football's back. And even though after the first 2 drives, it's a very diluted product, and even in the first 2 drives, it's very vanilla, I'm just glad it's back. I'm glad we'll have actual things to talk about beyond like cell phone videos people posted on Twitter from training camp. So it's back. We're a month away from the good stuff, but it's the appetizer.
No, I absolutely agree. And I actually did have one thought, though. I'll be interested to see how the running backs are used and the order in which they're used, how they're rotated. I'll be interested to see how Gainwell looks. That'll be cool. I do imagine he'll play at least in the second half and probably get a bunch of touches. So it'll be cool to see Gainwell. It'll be cool to see, Kerryon Johnson, if he looks cooked at all, or if he looks like he's got some spring in his step. Who knows? Boston Scott, I think we have a good idea of what Boston Scott is at this point. So that'll be interesting to see, though, how if they use Miles. I'm not sure if he'll play, and then really Gainwell and Kerryon Johnson will be 2 guys I have my eyes on.
Yeah. Well, let's hop around the league, look at a few things real quickly, and then we'll get you guys out of here. So let's hop over to Indianapolis, where Sam Ehlinger and Jacob Eason have been splitting the first team reps. Now, supposedly, Carson Wentz is supposed to be back week 1. I don't know how 1 week after a 5 to 12-week surgery they are saying he's going to be back in 4 weeks. I don't really know, but what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, Carson Wentz rushing back from an injury. I tweeted this out. I just can't imagine what could go wrong. I think he'll come back and he'll stay healthy, and there will be no problems with Carson Wentz. Psych. I think it's crazy that they're trying to rush him back, and I guarantee doing it himself. I see there's a comment here. Yeah.
Yeah, Birdman. This is Aaron from Facebook says, great insights, fellows. Go Birds, fly Eagles, fly. Rent is due. Hurts season. Really appreciate it, Aaron. Thanks for hanging out. Hope we'll see you around some more of our chats, and again, maybe we can collaborate on something down the road. But really appreciate the support.
But yeah, for sure, appreciate the support. And going back to what I was saying about the Colts, I was just touching on Wentz there, but I was actually I was not shocked at all to see Ehlinger was outshining Jacob Eason. If you don't remember, my first ever video here with the Painted Lines, the first thing I came on at the Painted Lines was a late round draft targets thing with Shane and Dives, and Sam Ehlinger was my quarterback that I had as my late round target. So I like Ehlinger. I thought he was I think he still will be a good backup quarterback in the league. Now, should he be starting week 1 for any team? No. That's why you should be allocating more resources to your backup quarterback, especially when your starting quarterback is Carson Wentz. But if you're looking at the situation they're in, they're not going to trade for Foles or Minshew, allegedly. And if Wentz isn't ready for week 1, which it's looking like he is going to be, I guess, if I was a Colts fan, I'd rather see Ehlinger out there than Eason. I think he can do more on the ground. And I think when you're a backup quarterback who is going to be overmatched, both of those guys are going to be overmatched. They're so young. They're so new in the league. I think I'd rather have the guy who can move around a bit and can give me some mobility. So I think Ehlinger won't be a train wreck, I guess, but he's not going to be. Their first 5 weeks are absolutely brutal. So even if they have a hobbled Wentz, if they have Jacob Eason, if they have Sam Ehlinger, it's going to be a rough first 5 weeks no matter what for the Colts, I think.
Yeah, hopefully Carson makes it back week 1. Hopefully he stays healthy. I want that first round pick, but man, the Colts are going to be a disaster this year. They have no receivers. They have a bad quarterback who's coming off a year being the worst quarterback in the league, and now he's coming back from an injury at the same time, and their offensive line is in shambles. Like, what happened to the Eagles last year that made Carson Wentz fall apart? His offensive line was in shambles. His receivers were awful, and he had no chemistry. I don't see how that's any different this year. Missing all this time, no chemistry. The receivers are bad. The offensive line is banged up. I just don't see how this ends in anything but heartbreak for Colts fans that may or may not have talked themselves into this team.
Yeah, I mean, just reading off the first 8 weeks, like you go versus Seattle, versus the LA Rams, at Tennessee, at Miami, at Baltimore, and then that's that first 5. If they win 2 of those 5, I'll be surprised. Like given the situation that they're in, if they go 2-3, that's a win. Then you get an easy one. You go to Houston, then at San Fran, then versus Tennessee. Like that is a brutal 8-week stretch. You're playing 6 teams out of that 8-week stretch that are currently projected to make the playoffs. Like that is absolutely brutal. I don't know. I mean, that could be a 2-6 start. That could be a 3-5 start. And if you're at that point already for the Colts, that's already going to bring into the mind, the Carson Wentz 75% snap count thing. So I really think that the Colts are going to get off to a brutal start to the season. If you take a look at the Titans and the Jags schedules, they have pretty easy starts to the schedule. I think they jump out in front. The Colts lag behind, and it quickly becomes, a rebuilding or a down year for the Colts.
Yeah. Birdman chiming in again on YouTube saying, it's funny you say that because all I hear is how Wentz is going to lead them to the Super Bowl. And you're right. What receivers do they have? I mean, it's the ghost of – yeah, it's the ghost of T.Y. Hilton and a bunch of guys that just haven't panned out. So they've got good rushing attack and they've got good running back involvement in the passing game. He's reunited with Reich, but, I wanted to see – what Carson Wentz was going to be. Is he the Carson Wentz of 2017? Is he the Carson Wentz of 2019? Was it Frank Reich all along? Like, I wanted to see that. But now you're going to have him coming off an injury and the offensive line banged up, and I just don't see how we can find that out this year.
Yeah, everyone loved this landing for Carson Wentz. Like, in the offseason when we were talking about who he was going to get traded to, everyone was, Indy, Frank Reich. And I kept saying at the time, I was like, Carson Wentz should want to go to Chicago. If you go to Chicago, you get Allen Robinson. And I know that that's pretty simple, but Chicago has won 12-8 games in the last 3 years. So it's not like they've been a bad team. And they've had one of the worst quarterback play in football each year, even when they won 12 games with Trubisky. So I think that Carson Wentz did not land in a spot that was as favorable as everyone else thought it was. Because they didn't fix their receiver problem. I think they have the worst receiver corps in football, and I don't think that their O-line is nearly the O-line that a lot of people seem to think that it is.
Yeah. Well, let's take a look at a few contracts that came out, and if you're watching here in the comments live, drop a comment, let us know what you're thinking about, and we'll be happy to throw those up and talk about them too. But a couple of big contracts I want to get to. We'll start with the lesser one because we're already in Indianapolis, but Darius Leonard signs a 5-year, $99.25 million deal. It includes $52.5 million in guaranteed money, and it makes him the highest paid inside linebacker in the league. Any thoughts on that, Mark?
My thoughts on that are that time moves very fast. Like, I remember Darius Leonard being a draft prospect. I feel like that was like a couple weeks ago. I was thinking about Darius Leonard as a draft prospect. He's going into his 4th year. He's already getting huge contracts. So yeah, that's my takeaway. Not obviously he's a great player. The Colts, you're going to keep a guy like that around at his age. But yeah, it's crazy how fast guys, I feel like I hear some of these guys getting their first contract and I'm like, holy crap.
Yeah, I'm trying to just imagine the Eagles spending $5 million a year on a linebacker, much less $20 million a year. But I mean, it's a big contract, but he's one of the best linebackers in the league. I mean,
Absolutely.
you got to pay up for that guy. He gives them a lot of flexibility in what they can do in their defense. So he's worth every penny of it. Up next for them is going to be the Quentin Nelson extension. Indianapolis has drafted really well over the years, and those big contracts are coming up due now. It's one of the reasons you've seen them so conservative in free agency. And it's one of the things that, frankly, is kind of hamstrung them in the quarterback chase. Is their general manager does a great job with managing what they have, with drafting, but he doesn't have that aggressiveness to go push all his chips into the middle and go for it. And you saw that with the trade for Carson Wentz instead of trading up in the draft, or even they were after Stafford and they didn't land him. They weren't willing to match that offer. So there's only so far you can go being conservative. Eventually you have to swing for the fences. And I am glad that, for all the faults of the Eagles front office, I am glad that they're not afraid to swing big.
Yeah, no, that's definitely fair. And I've been critical of the Colts because they've taunted that cap space for years. And I knew that bill was coming due. Obviously, we've seen how good that they've done in the draft and the guys you mentioned, Quentin Nelson, Darius Leonard, and more. But you could have went out and signed short-term deals or deals you could have gotten out of to give yourself a better chance to really compete for a title last year. And I was really critical of them making the decision to go get Phillip Rivers last year. And that felt like, to me, a commitment to being above average, a commitment to being good, and not a commitment to competing for a Super Bowl. And that kind of feels like the same thing with Carson Wentz. But Birdman has a great comment here, off subject, but Dak Prescott said he had to have 2 surgeries on his ankle. That was undisclosed, but released it on Hard Knocks yesterday. I did watch Hard Knocks this morning. Shane, did you watch Hard Knocks?
I didn't. I don't have any way to watch Hard Knocks, so I've actually never watched Hard Knocks, but I always keep up with it through podcasts and stuff.
Yeah, I'll get you my account to watch. I'll send it over to you for sure, so we can kind of talk about that every week, maybe. Since it is in the division, so there is stuff that's going to be super relevant to us. I thought it was a really great episode. Hard Knocks is like one of my favorite shows on TV. But yeah, it led off the show. Dak Prescott said that he had 2 surgeries, which it's shocking that didn't leak. Jay Glazer, Schefter, Rappaport. No one had said that before, so it's pretty big for HBO, I guess, that they were able to get, to leak news to start Hard Knocks. But it was much different than any Hard Knocks I've ever seen. Like, usually Hard Knocks is about the team. Like, they focus on, the guys that are getting cut even in the first episode and, the guys on the fringe. This was like, we're going to show you Dak Prescott and Ezekiel Elliott for 40 minutes. We're going to give you 10 minutes of Micah Parsons and 5 minutes of Jerry Jones. And that's basically what you got. So it wasn't a great episode, but there were some funny moments. So I'll send you over that, and we can talk it over more next week.
Okay, cool. Well, let's go rapid fire here, hit a couple more headlines, and we'll get out of here. So Josh Allen signs the big extension, 6-year deal worth $258 million. $150 million of that is guaranteed. He is now locked up until he is 32 years old. So his contract, according to Spot Track, breaks down. It is $10 million this year, $16 million, then 39, 41, 51. Then it starts to come back down, 47, 40, and 41. I kind of think, it is a great deal for the Bills if he is an elite quarterback. If he is the guy that he was in year 3, it's just hard to do that deal on one good year. I asked the Eagles. They did it with Carson Wentz, right? 2017 was phenomenal. They worked that extension out, and he just falls apart. And so if Josh Allen maintains that production, they have him locked in at what's going to end up being a below-market deal for a long time. And so if it works out, it's a big swing, but it's the nature of the NFL. You got to make those big swings. We just talked about it with Indianapolis, and they keep those cap hits low for the next 2 years to make a strong Super Bowl push. So I like it. It's risky. Risky is the only way to win, though.
Yeah, I agree. Josh Allen, the only thing I'll push back on is I obviously last year he was a different quarterback than he was in 2019, but they did go 10-6 in 2019. So I think he's been a really good quarterback for the last 2 years. He took a leap last year to put himself in that top 5, like pretty clearly, in my opinion. And he's, the Bills for these next couple of years until that bill really comes due, no pun intended, when they bump up to $39 million, they're going to be a perennial Super Bowl contender until that happens. And probably even in that first year of that deal, you'll still probably have enough of the guys previously. You probably only have to make like one big cut, big money cut probably on the defense to get back to normal. The next couple of years, the Bills are in position to win a Super Bowl, and that's all you can ask. And that I like the way that they did that contract to give themselves that flexibility over the next couple of years. And, you're going to have to pay that big salary eventually anyway. So why not just bump it up a few more million? So I like it. I think Brandon Beane has done a great job in Buffalo as the GM. And I think Sean McDermott gets a lot of credit for their GM doing a fantastic job and Josh Allen being an awesome quarterback. But I think what they have going on in Buffalo is something you wouldn't want to mess with. So, yeah, you give Josh Allen any contract he wants, basically. But I like how they handled it. And Josh Allen's another guy I can't believe is already getting paid. It's crazy to me. That 2017 quarterback class is, I guess they're about to get their money, and that was that was one of my favorite draft classes to evaluate. So, and it's one of my favorite draft classes to go back and look at. that 2017 class, because I love Lamar so much. I loved Allen so much. And I like it so much because I was right, basically, is what I'm saying. But because I was out on Darnold and Rosen, and I was like, Baker for me was like, he ended up going first, but Baker for me was like, yeah, I can see it both ways. Like I was very much like in the middle, and I loved Allen and Lamar. So I hope that this Allen contract, I'll finish this out by saying, I hope this Allen contract helps Lamar get paid.
So speaking of Baker, Baker had the quote. He said, "I'm worried about winning. I think the rest will take care of itself." And then he later said, "I'm not doing the negotiation, so quite frankly, I don't give a damn." So apparently Baker is not currently negotiating with Cleveland regarding an extension. To me, if you believe that your quarterback's the guy, you extend him ASAP before the market resets, because the market resets every year. The Browns haven't done that. And so the question is, are they sold on him? And I don't think they are. I don't know if they should be. I mean, he was good last year. He rebounded from a bad 2019. I think if he starts to show early this year, he's the guy. You got to sign him, and you need to do it fast. If he would take a contract and that average value of like 30 million, 31, 32, I would do that. But if he wants more than that, I would make him prove it to me first. I wouldn't be willing to take the Josh Allen swing with Baker Mayfield right now. What say you?
Yeah, I agree with that. It's interesting. I guess I never thought, I've never sat down and thought does Cleveland think Baker's the franchise quarterback? I don't think the GM that made the pick is there anymore. So that is an interesting thought. It's hard to say no because of how Baker, after 2 years ago, I was ready to kind of throw the towel in on Baker a little bit and say, I don't know about this guy. This might be a make or break year. And I thought he was fantastic last year. Like, he really shocked me, especially down the stretch in some games. And in that playoff game against Pittsburgh, I really was shocked at how good Baker Mayfield looked. And so Baker's one of those guys in the league that I don't know what my opinion is on him, like more than any other quarterback in the league, maybe. But yeah, like you said, if you believe in your quarterback, you should pay him as soon as possible. I guess their retort might be, what's the worst case scenario? Like, we end up having to spend a couple more million. We think that is a better worst case scenario than paying him and then him absolutely sucking or him getting hurt or whatever that may be. So I guess I get it, but if you want to, I think Cleveland's, I've said this before, but they're my pick to go to the Super Bowl. So I love their roster, and that doesn't have a lot to do with Baker. So that does get a little risky. But if you're a team that has aspirations to go to the Super Bowl, and I think Cleveland probably thinks they do, that means you probably should believe in your quarterback, and that means you should probably pay him. So it's an interesting question. I don't know if I believe Cleveland. I know I believe Baker. Like, I've had questions about Baker before. I've never had questions about his personality, though. I think he is like invested in winning, and that's all he's thinking about. And when he says that he's not negotiating, I don't think that means that Baker's not in talks with the Browns. I think it means that Baker's agent is in talks with the Browns. I think
that's true. That could be what he means.
People were reading into it, and I saw it on Twitter, and I think I saw the video of him saying it. And I think that more so it just means like, yeah, I mean, I'll let my agent handle it, and I'll be out here practicing and getting better. And Baker seems like the type of guy you'd want as a franchise quarterback from a personality standpoint.
Yeah. Well, over to New Orleans, Michael Thomas clapped back at the Saints. He put it out in a since-deleted tweet. He said, "They tried to damage your reputation. You saved theirs by not telling your side of the story." Now he's reportedly asked for a trade. And so, I mean, he needs to tell his side of the story if he wants a trade. I mean, his value is low already because of the injury, whatever's going on there. The Saints would need a $9 million dead cap this year and $23 million next year if they traded him. And so it'd have to be an enticing offer. The team acquiring him would owe him 15, and 18 million over the next 3 years, which is perfectly fine for a guy of his caliber. But I don't know. It'll be something to keep an eye on. And then let's hop over to Seattle real quickly. We've got their offensive tackle, Brown, and their safety / linebacker. Yeah, I'm not going to call him a safety. Jamal Adams are holding out for new contracts. This is why you don't trade 2 first-round picks for a safety who can't cover anyone and is just a linebacker. Adams can't cover. You can't pay him what he wants paid, but you can't not pay a guy you traded 2 first-round picks for. And so you've got Brown, Adams, and Russell Wilson are all upset with Seattle. And to me, it just feels like the team's about to fall apart. I mean, winning cures all, and if they get Brown and Adams to report, great. But if the team struggles out of the gate, drops 2 of their first 3, how long is it going to take for that powder keg to go off? And so it's going to be interesting to watch in Seattle.
Yeah, no, I completely agree that it does feel like it's going to go off the rails. Like I could see this all season coming. I mean, I have them going 10-7, something like that, sneaking into the playoffs, probably losing first round. They could do that, and then they could still blow it up in the offseason. Like I think Pete Carroll could be gone. Russell Wilson demands his way out. Jamal Adams, who knows what's going to happen with that if they're going to pay him. But you put it perfectly. You can't pay a guy that can't cover, but you can't not pay a guy that you trade the capital that they did for Jamal Adams. And it was so ridiculous when they made that trade for Jamal Adams. Like Jamal Adams is a guy that I loved coming out of the draft because I didn't think he would be this terrible at coverage at the next level. So it's just hard to even. Jamal Adams did not help their defense last year. Like he was a negative player to their defense. I don't know what his PFF grade ended up being, but he was a bad football player last year, and it felt like they were worse when he was on the field. So who knows what's happening? Who knows if they'll hold out or if they'll be back for week 1, I'm saying. But yeah, Seattle's a mess. I mean, it couldn't feel like more of a mess. And it's just they replaced Schottenheimer. They got a new offensive coordinator. And everyone who would think correctly would think, Seattle's trying to go a little bit more up-tempo, try to be a little bit more run and gun, try to cater to Russ, who clearly wants to throw the ball. Let Russ cook is like a movement that Russ is trying to get created. And all of the reports out of training camp, all the reports from the OC, all the reports from Pete Carroll, like, we are going to run the shit out of the ball, and we are not like throwing the ball 50 times. And it's like, I just don't get what Seattle thinks they are. Like, you have Russell Wilson, you have Tyler Lockett, you have DK Metcalf. Throw the effing ball, man.
Yeah, absolutely. Jamal Adams' PFF grade last year was a 64.2, so not great. And then let's make our last stop in San Francisco. Mark, who is the quarterback in San Francisco? Kyle Shanahan had this to say. He said, I think we can write it out week in and week out. There's going to be 2 guys they believe will help us win, and I think they'll trust us to make the right decision, whether it's permanently, for 1 game, for a series, or just a situation. And from where I'm sitting, that's just an asinine statement. You don't trade 3 first-round picks and a third-rounder to move up 9 spots to take a quarterback if you think Jimmy Garoppolo can already win. And so, if Lance looks good, and reports are that he does, he's going to start very soon. It may not be week 1. I think it's more likely to be Trey Lance week 1 than Jimmy Garoppolo, though.
I really don't know. This situation's always been so tough for me because I think Trey Lance can be so good in that Shanahan offense. And I think if he does look good right now, I'm generally a proponent of playing rookies right away. I think that the only way to learn is to play personally. I know, it's tough to say that with Mahomes, with Aaron Rodgers, with those guys. I personally, my retort to that would be, I think they probably would have been fine if they played earlier. But so I generally am a play rookies guy. But the problem with Jimmy Garoppolo is not his performance. So that's what makes this such a weird thing to evaluate. And I don't think that they traded up for a quarterback because they don't think Jimmy Garoppolo can be a good quarterback when he plays. He can't stay healthy. So it just makes it such a weird thing. It's like, do they go with Garoppolo because he probably is the better option right now? Because I think Garoppolo's a really good quarterback, but it's hard to go with him and then take him out, and then you can't bench Trey Lance once he's in. That's kind of the thing. Once you go with Trey Lance, you have to go with Trey Lance, and he has to be your guy. So that's the only thing I'll push back on that Shanahan quote. We're going to make that decision week in and week out. Like, if Trey Lance starts a game, he's starting every game until he gets hurt or whatever that is, because he's your guy going forward. You're not going to do what they did with Tua last year, I don't think, and be benching him and bringing him back and then benching him. That is not a way to mold a rookie quarterback successfully. So I think Shanahan's too smart for that. He won't do that to Trey Lance once he gets in. But truly, I have no idea what they're going to have week 1. Like, what you said makes sense. Like, they gave up all that capital for Trey Lance. You have to play him as soon as possible. But the only thing that keeps me back from it is that Jimmy Garoppolo's record in the games that he plays is so immaculate. And he has been such a winner when he's played. And it's just tough to erase, the memory of him missing so many games and the memory of him missing some of those throws in the Super Bowl. So, I don't know if they're going to go Trey Lance week 1, but there's no way that Trey Lance doesn't start before the end of the year.
Yeah. Well, that's going to about wrap it up for our show tonight. Mark, you got any final thoughts? Anything that didn't make it into the show for us?
No, not yet. We're gonna we'll add another segment next week for Hard Knocks. I'm excited about that because I love Hard Knocks. And that is like, I was watching it this morning, and even though it's the goddamn Cowboys, and we hate the Cowboys over here, I'm sure, but it still got me ready for football. Like hearing that music, that intro music to Hard Knocks, and just seeing training camp stuff and hearing the mic'd up conversations and the funny little like tidbits in there. I'm ready. I am so done with baseball. And the Phillies, I love the Phillies more than anyone. I'm done with baseball. I am ready for football. Bring it on. Only a month left.
For my final thought, I want to give a shout out to Patrick Robinson. Spent a majority of his year in New Orleans. Decided to call it quits yesterday, which makes you wonder what's going on in New Orleans right now. But the biggest moment of his career came in the NFC title game against the Vikings in 2017 when he got a pick six with the Eagles up 7-0, and the Eagles never looked back, rolled 38-7, and went on to win the Super Bowl. So shout out to Patrick Robinson. Enjoy your retirement, and you're always a Philly legend.
Absolutely. Real quick, just on that point, Patrick Robinson, that's my favorite moment from the Super Bowl run. That pick six, it really changed the momentum for the entire season. And Chris Long always says it on his podcast. There is no team in the history of football who was coming into the Link on that night with that fan base and that team, and that was beating the Philadelphia Eagles in 2017. So, and he always says that he's never heard a stadium as loud as while Patrick Robinson was returning that interception. So that is a moment I'll remember forever, alongside of the rest of our listeners and the rest of Philadelphia. So he'll never buy another beer in Philadelphia.
Absolutely. Well, that's going to do it. Thank you guys for joining us for episode number 3 of Chalk Talk. If you enjoy what you heard on the show, and we know that you do, be sure and smash that subscribe button on YouTube. Drop us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. You can follow me on Twitter at @halfandhalf_TPL. You can follow Mark at @MarkHenryJr_. So for me, from Mark, from the Painted Lines, we'll see you guys next time.